I think we do need more women in leadership in general. When you give people power and control, a lot of people have now the ability to abuse it.
But I think men's pressure to make money is bigger. I think some women were settling, and maybe some men too.
Created by Make It Common, each episode brings together two people with different perspectives. They're given a series of statements and must decide whether they agree or disagree. Once they choose their side, they go head-to-head, defending their views and challenging each other. Real opinions, real conversations, no scripts. This is The Other Side.
Good afternoon, I'm Ed. So I have a TikTok account called Ed Isn't Available. I'm a finance bro really, but I make some TikToks on the side.
Good afternoon, my name's Estelle. I'm a journalist and content creator, and I have a platform called Culture in Motion, at Culture in Motion on TikTok and Instagram, and also my personal TikTok and Instagram is at Estelle Uba, UBA.
First statement: a society led by women would function differently and possibly better than one led by men.
I agree.
I disagree.
I agree because I feel like I can't say that it would like function like significantly better, because I think human beings are human beings and we're always gonna just have like certain flaws. People have like a hunger for power, people are greedy, people are inherently selfish. But I will say that I think the way in which women have been socialized for, I guess, millennia has made us a lot less conflict, or a lot more conflict averse. Whereas I think men typically tend to lean more towards like violence to when it comes to solving problems, whereas women don't. So I can't say that it would function better in all parts of society, but I definitely think that there would be less violence, in my opinion. And I also think that there would be better diplomacy, more talking about situations, more empathy, I think. I don't think women and men are like, I don't think women are naturally more empathetic than men, like from the beginning of time, but I think we have become to be more empathetic because of how we are socialized to be.
Okay, I do agree with you that we are socialized differently, but I do think some of the outcomes, when you actually do look at, for example, when you look at all boys schools versus all girls schools, there's definitely probably more violence in all boys schools. But does that mean there's less bullying? Does that mean there's less like divisiveness and a lot of these arguments? I think the way we show our outcomes are just different as men and women, but we still do perform a lot of these same acts. And we see this in a lot of different factors. Even if you look at, for example, race and how different genders treat each other as races. Yes, there's maybe differences in how we behave. For example, if you look at racism and like the KKK and things, there was a lot of violence, but equally doesn't mean there was no violence between like white women and black women. It just came in a different way. So it's very hard when we are socialized together to kind of say society would be better with women in charge or men in charge. I don't necessarily think it's something which I can hypothesize, but I can say that we are both socialized in the same world. We both act looking at each other, but we just act in different ways within that.
I think what you raised some good points. I agree with you. Like if you go to girls' schools, there is still bullying, and it can get really like, yeah, it can get really bad. Like, you know, in its own way as well, toxic as well. One could argue that, you know, the kind of emotional or verbal abuse that women gravitate towards can have more of an effect than maybe the physical abuse. Maybe men fight it out and then move on. That's a fair argument, but I think overall, not having as much physical violence is the first start to having a better society. If you look at like domestic violence, I think when I think of society and I think of a lot of the biggest issues in society, aside from like poverty and economic ones, I think domestic violence is a big issue. I think sexual assault is a big issue. And all of these are things that men perpetrate more than women. Not that women don't, but men perpetrate it more statistically. So I think if you have a society that's where more women are in leadership, women, because they are victims of such behaviors predominantly, they would be able to create solutions to then like, they would prioritize solutions. I think men in leadership don't always prioritize things that are beneficial for women because like it doesn't affect them. Whereas if women are in leadership, they would be able to create solutions to things that do affect not just women, but children as well, like violence and whatnot.
I do agree with you. I think we do need more women in leadership in general, specifically because just more voices in the room that are championing your issues just leads to better solutions. I just don't necessarily think it is if women were in leadership instead of men, which is what the question is, that we would see a completely better world. It would be different. Would it be better? No. And one of the things I think about is, for example, when people are in positions of power, a lot of the time I don't even think it's a gender thing. I think it's a hunger for power thing. A lot of people, when they are in power, display very similar behaviors, and that could be men and women. And I think that's more about when you reach that level and you sacrifice a lot of things in terms of your personality, in terms of your empathy and things to get to those positions, you lose a bit more humanity than the general person would have. And I think because you have more men in those positions, they have a little bit more humanity loss than women. But if you replace that, which we do see sometimes where you have certain women or places where the power dynamic is different, we do see a bit more of an oppressive force. I think that's not because of gender, but because of a strive for power.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's kind of like a chicken egg situation. Like, does someone become a worse person because they're in power, or are there people that are predisposed to being like worse?
We can even think of it simply in a workplace. Like there are some people who, when you're your colleagues, you're friendly. The moment they get a little bit more power over you, they just change completely. That's not necessarily because of a gender thing. That's just because when you give people power and control, a lot of people have now the ability to abuse it. A lot of people don't know how to handle power.
Okay, that's a fair argument. But let's look at like countries like, for example, Iceland, where more women are in leadership. Iceland, don't quote me, but I think has a majority female representation in parliament, slightly over half. And Iceland is a country, not just Iceland, but also countries like Nordic countries. They tend to have like a better quality of life, and they're happier. And obviously these are cold countries. So, because we blame a lot of the unhappiness in the UK on like the cold, but like we are looking at countries where there is society functions more seamlessly. Not that there aren't issues, but you know, for example, prisons are rehabilitative. They don't seek to just punish. They seek to. So I think there is an empathy in the leadership of these countries that, you know, there is more socialism, for example. You know, education is free. So I think Iceland is a country like predominantly run by women, and I think when you have women in power, I agree with you. Naturally, that's not to say that, you know, if you take some of the MPs, female MPs in Iceland, I'm sure like a lot of them might be like sociopathic, right? Because like you say, to get to the top, a lot of the time people do lose their morals. But I still think that there might still be a good proportion that aren't, if that makes sense. So I think I agree with you. I can't completely hypothesize. Yes, a society run by women is definitely going to be great. I don't think it will be a great society. I think there will always be issues with human beings, but I think it would be a little bit better, even if it's just a little bit. Do you not think that at all?
I don't know.
Oh, I was enjoying that.
Yeah. So, Casey first question.
Second statement, one gender has more pressure placed on them to succeed.
You start.
I'll go agree.
Agree.
Okay, I think it depends on what we look at as success. I think success for men and women is different. For men, it is and this is typically, I'm not saying this is for every single person, for men it is accumulating value that is in multiple ways, financial, status, with people around you, and then a proof of that is, let's say, your wife, the family that you have. But in order to do that, you need to, first of all, attain material goods, attain some kind of respect in your workplace or among your community. Whilst I think with women, success is generally about how people collaborate together in terms of becoming a household, finding that partner, how you are with other people. So for men, we're socialized in a competitive manner, which is why there needs to be winners and losers. And you see this in how men are distributed along society, whether it's economically, in terms of how they look and how they attract people. It's generally, there are winners who get a lot of options and people who get absolutely nothing. And there's like a binomial distribution of how men are. There's not really as much men in the middle as much as there are two extremes. Whilst for women, in terms of progress, even if we look now in terms of educationally, women progress more as a community because of the fact that it is more communal and less competitive in that manner.
Yeah, those are good points. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it depends on how we define success, but if we're going off of the general idea of success as we define it in the Western world, which is usually financial and career related, I think men definitely have more pressure to succeed. I don't think that's you can't really debate that, because men historically from the beginning of time have always been perceived as the breadwinner. So naturally you are going to have to make that money. Basically, you've got people relying on you, and that's a pressure that obviously means that men's mental health is often impacted from that, because it's a lot to deal with. If we're talking about success in, let's say if you want to paint success in not the typical Western capitalistic lens, but success more so maybe in how you multitask and how you juggle the responsibilities of life, being a mother and being, while still maybe contributing to your household financially. I think women do have more pressure. I think men have pressure to make money, but I think women have more different kinds of pressure. But I think men's pressure to make money is heavier than the one that women have to make money. But if we're talking about just as a person, I think women are expected to have many things together at once, so you're kind of juggling loads of things at once. And obviously that's part of us fighting for the right to be able to work and to freedom from men, to not rely on men for our financial independence. So that's part of it. It means that we are basically able to get a degree and be able to get good jobs, but that old-fashioned pressure to be a mother and to be the primary carer in the home, to do the cleaning, the cooking, that hasn't adapted. So it's we're seeing us move forward financially and career-wise, but we're not really adapting the other pressures.
I do agree with you there. I think, unfortunately, within the new era that we're in, there is a lot of different pressures which are compounding. For example, women still have the pressures of that traditional role of being a mother, of being that nurturer within the household. But on top of that now, there is that capitalistic pressure of, you need to do this in your career, you need to have a social life, you need to have all of this. And that doesn't all work together. And one of the things sometimes I try and unpack, for example, when I was in a relationship, is it's not all about me. Just as much as, I want to do this and I want to progress in my job, equally, she also has that pressure. And when we are a unit, success is how you do together. And I think sometimes when we talk about, men have to be more successful or women, it's divisive in a way where it really shouldn't be. As a community, in general, in the world, the whole goal is to year by year, decade by decade, improve people's lived experience. So at some point, when we have conversations like this, we need to kind of realize that it is not like a competition. Do you know what I mean?
It is more,
exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I think the way what we define success in the Western capitalistic society is kind of the root of the problem.
Exactly.
Because if people see success as how can we raise communities that are like wholesome, where kids are happy and everyone has a better quality of life, then we can succeed more collaboratively as opposed to just like make money by any means necessarily, no matter who I have to step on to get ahead.
Because realistically that is not success. You can have all the money in the world but not be happy. You can have a lot of other things and still not be happy. Success, I think, is just living a good life and how you achieve that. The problem is a lot of people don't necessarily know what it takes to do that now, especially when things are more expensive. There is a lot of division with a various range of topics, politics, gender, and a lot of other things. So there is so much divisiveness and so much cloud in terms of what do people actually want to do, removed from money, removed from jobs, removed from, like, for example, a lot of guys can have no job, can be living at home, but if they have a rotation of girls, they'll be like, oh, it's fine. And a lot of other people will give them praise for that. But realistically, what are you doing? But vice versa, someone could be really successful at work and just have nothing else about them, no friends, no partner. Is that really success? Is that what we look at? And we see figures, for example, whether it's Trump, Elon, people who, okay, maybe they're successful because, he's a president or he's a billionaire. But realistically, these are people who have poor morals, people who are unlikable. And is that really what we look at as a figure of success? There's very much a mixed messaging in terms of what we see as success versus what we would actually, if we were looking at someone, be like, this is a successful person.
Third statement, modern dating culture is pushing men and women further apart instead of bringing them together.
Agreed.
I just think that I think it's a mixture of modern dating culture, but also just like social media in general. I don't think it's necessarily dating culture in and of itself, but I think it's what people do after they date or after they come out of a relationship, which is they go online and then they talk about their experience, which, sometimes is negative. And then it kind of purports the situation and makes other people feel like, oh my goodness, yes, this is my experience too. And now it's presented as being the only narrative rather than just you had a bad experience or you had bad experience and there is still someone out there for you and, that sort of thing. So I think it's mainly social media that creates that divide, or like online internet culture in general, like articles or everything. But yeah, it all plays a part.
Yeah, I think for me anyway, the start of where things really started changing was literally just dating apps specifically, because modern dating is more superficial than it was in the past. And now we can talk about, before it was more people were looking for a provider because they had to. But nowadays, when you're on a dating app, which is how most people generally date by and large now, you can only see someone's face, age, height, what they do. And you don't actually get to know them as a person straight away. While if you were, let's say, a few years back where apps didn't exist, where people actually had to go out and talk to people in person, a lot of the things which people care about a bit more about now, for example, just looks, your money status, don't necessarily apply. And because of that, that's what's made it a bit more toxic and superficial, because people now are now looking at people before they know anything about them. It's like, okay, what can this person do for me? And you would do that because you have the optionality, because of the fact that you're looking at, let's say, you could get in a day, maybe 20 different matches. How do you choose between those people? Well, you have to only look at what's there. Okay, who do I think is the best looking? Who do I think maybe has the better job? Who do I think is a little bit taller? And because of that, you have a divide in terms of people who have options and people who don't. And because the people who don't have options look at that and say, okay, well, the answer is, I need to look better, I need to make more money. They're not actually thinking of, oh, how do I develop as a person? And that's kind of what's made that environment toxic. But then you also have those people saying, well, how can I game the system? I can fake a lot of that stuff to, get women. And they will do that now. And then the next reaction is, well, women are like, okay, some of these people can fake that stuff. I need to be a bit more guarded in how I date. I need to make sure that I don't get played by these people. So they will then take more time and be more selective. And then the men are like, well, why are these people being more selective? They wouldn't do that to other people that they like. And then we get this whole compounding effect of people just being on guard, people trying to game a system. And I think that's what's kind of made the dating a bit more toxic.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never thought of it in the lens of dating apps per se. I just thought digitalization in general, but I think dating apps is definitely a factor as well. And I think dating apps and also just like social media, like, you know, because a lot of people like meet people through like the DMs or whatever.
Yeah.
I think all of these things together just kind of make people feel like they have more options than they actually do. I think it creates this like facade where it's like, oh my goodness, like I have the whole world at my fingertips. I could just like pick up my phone and talk to a guy in Brazil, like in like, you know, 1 second. So I think it makes people feel like, oh my goodness, wow. And when what the consequence of that is that you end up being almost insatiable in a way, like, you know, whereas like for our parents' generation, you couldn't just pick up the phone and talk to someone like on the other side of London. You kind of just dated who you knew, who was in your circle. And that the benefit of that is, like you said, you're meeting these people in real life. So you're going off of the vibe, like that chemistry, like from just being with them in person, whether it's in church or at a pub or whatever, a bar, whatever. So it's like dating felt more authentic then. It felt like you were just seeing the person for who they are. Whereas now, like you said, it's just like everyone's pulling the wool over everyone's eyes, and then that creates animosity and toxicity. And then now women are like, oh my goodness, I'm guarded. And then men are like, but then it's like some men feel entitled to women's attention. And but I think also another thing aside from digital culture is also just the changes that are happening in society economically. I think we're seeing women just not needing men financially, and I think with that comes, I think we call it the crisis of masculinity or crisis in masculinity, like in sociology, which is just like men are almost kind of losing their purpose. I don't think they're actually losing their purpose, but they feel like they're losing their purpose in society because they're no longer needed or like relied upon as being the sole like income earner. And I think with that comes a change in dynamics, because if women no longer need you, they don't have to like settle, right? Like, you know, I don't have to like just settle. Like I can actually choose what like who I like to be with or who I think is best for me, rather than just like being with someone because it's like, oh my goodness, I don't have any money, so I can't really go away. So I think that's also part of it. I think society's just changing. I don't think men know what to do with that, and I empathize with them, because it's like someone pulling the rug from under your feet and like you're like, oh my goodness, what like how did you get here? Do
you think the majority of people were settling before? You'd say that?
No, I wouldn't say the majority of people, because I don't think that could work statistically, but I think some women were settling, and maybe some men too. I think settling on both sides, because there's less transparency. You don't know what other people are doing because there isn't social media, so you don't really know if you're settling or not. You just know that you know what you have in front of you and you go with it. But I do think, especially women, I think a lot of our mothers settled.
I think both sides settled, probably in an equal amount, but just for different things. I think as a woman, if you do need provision, then you'll settle for someone who can guarantee you that. And for a lot of men who, I'm gonna be honest, back in the day when I'm not gonna say certain jobs, but when you only have that to offer, you're gonna settle for someone who will take you as well. That's not necessarily what you would completely want. I think right now, because of the fact that we have a different kind of mindset in terms of what roles should be, people are trying to be a little bit more selective as a average. Of course, there's still people who will settle on both sides and people who are superficial, but I think people now just want more. But the problem is with the economy as well, both sides. So I will say there's more women who don't need men, but there's also more men who just can't provide on a single income for most people. You have to now look at, well, okay, what else can I bring to the table? And women also like, well, what else do I want? The problem is there is not a middle ground yet where people are providing both. There's a lot of guys who'll be like, oh yeah, I'm happy to go 50-50, but they can't do the other side yet. The household duties, they can't do the parenting. And there's a lot of guys who are looking at women being like, okay, well, I don't just want you to be a mother in this, I want some other things too. But I don't think they feel that every person is there offering that just yet. I think there's still a way to go for both sides to fill in some of the gaps in order to be good partners for each other.
Fourth statement, men are falling behind in modern society.
Agreed.
I'd agree.
Do you want to know?
So I think there's a little bit of nuance within this. I think as a whole, are men falling behind? No. There's way more people now who are more successful and have more opportunity to be successful, but the group of people who were always going to be at the bottom, you're having an increase in what that looks like. As I said before, well, I don't think men progress as a standard bell curve. So it's not a top and a bottom. It's more of a binomial. So there's like two bell curves. So there's like a percentage in the bottom and there's a percentage in the top. Because of the fact that there is more education, so there's people of different races who can actually now become successful. There is a different standard in terms of what attractiveness looks like for men. It's not just white, and people date interracially. There are more men who have more access to success, to women, to money, to education, everything like that. But equally, because of the fact that the economy has got so much worse, you can't be, let's say, no offense to this, but like a postman and raise a family in the same way. You can't have no degree or no education and have as much access to women, to opportunities as you had before. So there's an increasing amount of people who are within that group who are being left behind. But there's also, on the other side, an increasing amount of people who are doing well, but they don't really care about those people. So that's what I would say.
I agree with you. I think it's kind of like what I was saying earlier it's about how we define success, right? Like if we see success as a two-parent household where both people are bringing in income, they both share like caring responsibilities, they both look after the children like fairly equally. I think that's a successful family, right? But I think the issue is historically we've always defined success with the man is the one who brings in the income, the woman is the one who looks after the kids. If we're going by that standard, which in my opinion is outdated, but we still go to it because that's all we know as a society, that's what we look to as the standard, even though things are changing, but we still kind of look to it as a standard, which is where the mismatch is. So I think that's why men, if that's the standard of success, then men definitely are falling behind because like you said, the economy no longer allows them to raise a family on just like one income, unless they are like obviously like, you know, very high earning. But even that, it's like, even people who are relatively high earning, like I've seen so many articles like recently about like how even someone who earns like 80K a year, which is way more than most people earn, still really doesn't even have that much left over to really like enjoy life. So I think the economy is like really the source of, I just think it's no longer feasible to just have a good life anymore, like with just like it's like it feels like you have to work so hard, or you have to have so many sources of income, you're constantly chasing money. You can't just be, like you said, be a postman and just know that okay, I can come home to my wife and kids and we're fine. Like, we're not rich but we're happy. You know, I don't think that happens anymore, and I think because of that men are being left behind in terms of how they define themselves as men. But I do think if we changed how we looked at it, then men wouldn't be left behind. If we changed how we look at men, if men also took the pressure off themselves and women took the pressure of men, I think that no, they're not being left behind. It's just society's changing.
I think one of the things, so I've spent some time talking to a lot of like young people, especially people who do kind of feel isolated. I think one of the biggest factors as well is prior to this modern generation, especially when you weren't online, there are a lot more instances of forced socialization. So you had to be in, let's say, after school clubs, or you had community groups, or you're just more interactive with people. But because of the fact that more things are now online, there's a growing percentage of people who are more just isolated from the world. And it tends to be more men because a lot of male activities that you can do are more isolating. There are more male gamers, there are just more men on certain sites which just don't allow social interaction in person. And these people just find themselves more and more retreating into sometimes toxic spaces, sometimes other things which are just very unproductive. And I think that's why you look at, for example, education. There are more women getting degrees now. Even below 30, now men and women earn roughly the same. In some studies, marginally women earn more. And it's because of the fact that there is a growing community of men who are just isolating themselves. And when we say left behind, it's quite hard because that implies that someone is leaving them behind. But are we leaving them behind, or are they leaving themselves behind? And what is the solution? Because I think there has to be, at an individual level, personal accountability of, oh, okay, well, what can I do to make my life better? But then equally, as a society, we are socialized to help each other. Well, what can we do to put structures in place to help these men? Because if you look throughout history, one of the most dangerous things is an isolated man who has nothing to lose. So that is definitely something which, as a community, we have to look at. The problem sometimes is when we talk about that, it's almost like we are putting that as the main issue above, for example, women's issues. And I can see, as a woman, you're hearing, oh, men are getting left behind. It's like, so what? You've had all this time to make progress, and now finally we're doing things, and now it's our problem to look after these people. And I guess I don't necessarily know the answer for that. I think that is just something where, as a group, we need to think about, well, what is the solution to that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think one of the solutions is therapy. I think everyone needs therapy, men and women. I think we, especially in a society that's changing so rapidly, I think we've changed so much as a society in comparison to previous centuries. There's so much going on with technology and everything. So I think we need therapy. I think it starts with kind of men and women, like you said, taking accountability for themselves. I don't think as women we should just see it as oppression Olympics, where it's just oh yeah, why are you talking about men being left behind when we've got sexual violence to deal with? Those things can coexist.
Yeah.
And really and truly, those things are interlinked. If we started seeing society as more collaborative, where it's I want men to be more mentally stable, feel more fulfilled, feel like there's not as much pressure on them, to be able to, I want them to be happier because it makes me happier. Because if men are happier, then women are happier because we coexist in society together. So a healthy man is a better partner, is a better father. So I think women need to not see it as so us versus them, and it needs to be more, okay, it's in our best interest to make sure that we are also not kind of perpetuating this kind of outdated model where we're just kind of putting pressure on men. That's not to say that obviously you don't want men to work hard. Obviously you want men and women to work hard. You want people to work hard in order to feed their families, but it shouldn't. I think it needs to move. It needs to make sense. It needs to be okay, I know in this economy, a man cannot just raise our family alone. So I need to be willing to contribute as well to it. And that means that when I'm dating, my expectations should change. You can still expect a man to take the lead, but you can't expect him to do it all. I mean, you can if you want to, but I don't think it's sustainable, and I don't think it makes for a healthy partnership, unless you are completely fine with being very trad wife and just it's you take care of this, I only take care of this. But I think a lot of women don't want that nowadays. I think you want more shared roles in caring, so you should want more shared roles in finances.